Welcome to Find, Tell, Share, the Storytellers podcast. I'm Chris Sissons and my business is Market Together. I'm a local marketing coach and I specialize in using stories for marketing, business development and finding the real work that only you can do. And here is...
Hi, I'm Jemma Rosenthal and my business is Creative Hearts, and I'm a creative life coach, a singer-songwriter, actor, dancer, author and poet. I do many creative things and I help you to live your most creative life and find your voice. So on this show, we talk about everything storytelling. This is our 17th podcast, and so far we haven't really talked about fiction. Chris and I mostly work with stories from real life, but they are influenced by fiction in various ways, especially through folklore, which subtly shapes all the stories we tell. We'll be covering the role of fiction in business storytelling and in songs, and we might even touch on westerns because...
I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Chris Smith, who is an author of, you've guessed it, westerns. Chris is from KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and he's speaking to us from there today. He has 5 westerns on Amazon, and you'll be able to find those in the show notes, and has just completed a fantasy novel. He's an avid fly fisherman and enjoys getting into the water in his spare time. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jemma. Great to be with you guys today. For the moment, it's writing, but one day when I hone those fishing skills, maybe somebody will pay me to fish. That's the dream.
Oh, yes. Yes. So, Chris, the thing I remember about your Western stories, or Cowboys and Indians as we called it back in my days, when I was a kid, I wasn't interested in them. My grandfather was a great fan of Westerns, and I had we used to watch Bonanza on the telly. I don't know if you remember that, Chris.
Yeah,
Jemma
I do.
And what was the? Oh yeah, and then I had a school friend, and Paul was a great Western fan, and he told me about a Western called Slain. I think it was Slain, and which he found very evocative, particularly at the end of the story where he rides off into the sunset, and that. But that was a particular story that he found particularly moving, and I was just wondering how you got into westerns, and was there a particular western story or format that initially inspired you?
Good question. I've always been a reader, always loved reading, so I've read everything from Ludlum, Robert Ludlum, to Agatha Christie to Dick Francis. I think by the time I was 8, I'd already read The Call of the Wild and Moby Dick. So we had those at school, so I really enjoyed that. And I just always liked cowboys. There's just something about them that appeals. You know, they're tough, they're rugged, they go in, they take care of the bad guys, and like you said, they ride off into the sunset. So when I was young, I read lots of Louis L'Amour. Always loved the Sacketts, all his tales about that family and how they always come together and help each other out. And I just had writing a book on my bucket list. So I started writing one day and I thought, okay, what am I going to go for? And it just turned out to be a Western. Really enjoyed it because it's a nice period of time. It's simple. You know who the good guys are. You know who the bad guys are. And your books have always been like that. You've got no gray. So I've started trying to introduce a little bit of a little bit more depth of character into my characters and not make them so clearly black and white. There's the good guy was always the quickest gun and the toughest fighter, and he could ride for days without getting tired, etc. And it's not realistic. People want somebody that they can relate to. So my characters are good. He is quick with a gun. He can fight well, but he's not Rambo. He's not going to take on a whole army of people by himself, and his quick temper often gets him into trouble. So he needs to get help from his friends to get himself out of it and basically save his bacon. So it's not just him saving them, they often have to save him. And I think it just makes the characters a little bit more realistic.
Mm-hmm. So where does the realism come from? Are you drawing on your own experience when you write these novels?
Yeah, no gunfights yet for me, but yeah, I played a lot of rugby when I was younger. Really enjoyed that. It's just it's a team game, and you never had just one person having to do absolutely everything. You put yourself out there for your friends, and uh, I want heroes that's the kind of hero that I enjoy, when there's a little bit of depth to the character. So he's got a backstory. He doesn't just come along, do ABC, and then move on. You want to know why he does what he does. I think that's pretty much a tradition of storytelling. You have to build up that character so that your readers enjoy who the person is. It becomes a real person to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the I mean, one of the things that interests me is the influence of mythology and folklore. And I noticed that you mentioned quite a few authors who you wouldn't think of immediately as Western writers. Um, but I was wondering whether you do see those sort of traditional themes and shapes as you're writing your novels.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed Agatha Christie. For one, when I first started writing, I thought I wanted to write a murder mystery, and you don't actually realize how good she is until you've tried to do it yourself. She was phenomenal, and it's the reason why she's one of the best authors ever.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've tried to do is take little bits and pieces. So I'm trying to create a more vivid characters the way Ludlam
Mm-hmm.
did, and then also bring in a bit of mystery and a bit of surprise there. So some of my books will tell you who the bad guy is. You'll get a chapter from their point of view saying, "This is why we're doing this. This is where we want to go," and it's making the book move. You want to know what people's motivation is and how they react to certain situations. But then in other books, so I've got two which are called Blood on the Range, Caught in the Crossfire, and Blood on the Range, The Breaking of a Bad Man. And Breaking of a Bad Man is the sequel. It picks up just a little bit after Caught in the Crossfire. And I wanted to bring a bit of mystery in there. So there's a gang that the guys are after, but there's this hidden mastermind. So you're only seeing part of the picture, and it's kind of that Agatha Christie feel of who is the person, who's that guy out there, the puppet master controlling everything. So yeah, storytelling's always been about keeping people interested. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
since it was an oral tradition, and you do that by creating characters that people can relate to, and by getting them to want to know what happens next. I get my family to edit my books, so I'll usually write a chapter or two, send it out to be checked for mistakes, and I get the most satisfaction when my brother or my mom or my dad or wife or whoever comes back to me and says, "Okay, that was good. Fix this. What happens next? We need to know what happened next. Come on, get busy with the next chapter. What's happening? What's this guy doing? Why did she do that? Or why did he do that?" It's that buzz. It's the reason why you watch a TV series every week. You want to know what happens next.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting approach to editing. I mean, I know some people are very jealous of their writing, and they don't share it with their close relatives because of the feedback that they get. But I was just wondering, Jemma, do you share your songs with your family and get feedback from them?
They kind of just hear them all the time anyway, because if I'm playing, and then they'll hear it if they're in the house. But yeah, I do sometimes share some recordings I've been doing lately, and I showed them my dad, and I said, what do you think of these? And it's good to get feedback on things. I try not to like think take too much. It's nice when you get positive feedback, obviously, but if it's not positive, then or if it's critiquing it, I try not to take it too personally, because obviously, as soon as someone critiques something, they're coming from their perspective. So I actually posted something on my Instagram that Prince said about the creation is actually done. It's in the creation that the song is done, or the story, or any kind of artwork. And as soon as you give it to someone else, then the perspective is changed, because they're actually, in a way, he didn't say this, but I'm just elaborating now. The perspective has changed because they're adding their own experiences to it. So, say if someone reads a book, they're going to perceive it from their own perspective, or if they hear a song, they're going to perceive it from their own experiences, and pick up on things that you might not have picked up on even when you were writing it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I can't remember. Yeah.
That's exactly why I get so many different people to read it. My mom's a teacher, part of the education department here in South Africa, and when they were going through foundation phase, which is your little kids, they were taught that there are over 100 different ways in which people learn. So that means theoretically, if we put 100 different people into a room and ask them to draw a picture of my character, you could get 100 completely different pictures. There might be one or two general elements that are the same, but everybody, like you said, everybody perceives something different. So I'll create it, and then somebody will come in and adapt it slightly and adapt it. And at the end of the day, I think that's what you need to do, because you're writing it for an audience. You're not writing it to sell it to yourself or for just you to listen to. You want other people to enjoy it, and that's why you need that feedback.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's, yeah. Well, we'd love to hear a story from you, Chris. I think you brought something along to share with us. So over to you.
Yeah, let me get in. I've actually got an extract from one of my first books. It's the first Steve Savage Bounty Hunter book. So I'm just going to pull that up quickly. It's the beginning of a bounty hunter, and what's happened is that our hero's gone out. He's just a normal farmer. So they want to know, basically, when I structure something, I don't just make my hero good straight away. Quite often I like to build them up and get them to learn how to use their weapons or their guns or whatever. So when I'm starting the story here, it's not with this brilliant bounty hunter. He's a guy who comes from if I can call it a fighting type family, but he's not a gunman by any chance. Okay, so Chapter 1, California, 1867. Steve Savage surveyed the empty field and swore viciously. He and his brother had grown worried when their hand, Julio Marietta, had failed to arrive for breakfast after a trip to the outlying spring on their ranch to check on the cattle there. They had arrived to find Julio lying in the field, barely alive. His shirt was covered with blood, and his six-shooter and the cattle were missing. Steve could see Julio's horse cropping grass about 500 yards away. The six-shooter was a prized possession of Julio's, with a stallion carved into an ivory handle, and the young hand would be hopping mad about its loss, if he survived. Steve's green eyes flashed and his face was creased in a scowl. Damn it, Jamie. Those bastards shot Julio up and left him for dead, and they've cleaned us out good and proper. Not even one darn critter left. Steve turned his attention back to Julio, and he tightened the bandage firmly around the injured hand's chest and shoulder, causing him to moan slightly. His younger brother, Jamie Savage, took off his hat and ran a hand through his blonde hair, a look of frustration falling over his tanned features. He was 3 years younger than Steve's 30 years old, blonde and blue-eyed. Once Steve had finished binding the unconscious Julio's wounds, he and Jamie hefted the wounded man up onto the saddle of his horse and lashed him in place. Julio's face was pale, and a sheen of sweat covered his forehead. Just going to skip ahead here quickly. Okay, so now we're getting on to the cousins. I've introduced a few family members there just to kind of broaden it out a bit and show that there's that family connection there. So we've got Steve and his cousins Ty and Tucker. Ty and Tucker are the gunmen in the family. They're a little bit crazy, but lovable. They love a good fight, and they basically take him under their wing and teach him how to do everything. Okay. How do you figure he's doing the bare minimum, Tuck? Steve shot his cousin a confused glance. Easy. Take a look-see at the number of tracks he leaves. No more than half of what the other hombres leave. Means he's sitting on his hindquarters more than the others. Ty had been examining some tracks down near the stream. He'd found a clear boot print in a patch of soft earth, and he pressed his fingers down in the soil next to it, with his palm flat. Looks like we're only about 3 days behind him. We're right on schedule to catch up with him on the 5th day. Steve was intrigued and went over to look. He wanted to know just how his cousin had figured out how far ahead of them the rustlers were. Tell me how you figured that out, Ty. I'd be mighty obliged if you could teach me. Happy to. I pressed down with my fingers and the flat of my hand to create a fresh print so as I can compare it to the boot print I found. That way I got me something to judge by. Steve nodded his understanding. Satisfied, Ty continued with his lesson. The way to judge the age of the marks is to examine the edges. The older they are, the more the edges will have dried out and crumbled into the print. These have crumbled a lot, which makes me figure they're still at least 3 days ahead of us. Steve was amazed. They were only a day and a bit into their trip, and he'd already learned so much. Whenever they stopped, Steve took the opportunity to practice his quick draw. His cousins were impressed at how well he was doing, and gave him a few pointers on how to draw faster and fire more accurately. Steve was pleased when they declared that they were confident he could hold his own when they caught up with the rustlers. He resolved to keep practicing every chance he got. So yeah, that's basically every character, every book. If my guy hasn't honed his skills already, he's going to keep learning. He's going to keep looking at the people around him. Everybody has something to teach. And like I said, I don't want my guy to be the best straight away. He needs to struggle a little bit so that people can relate to him. And that way he becomes more realistic.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with Christopher Booker's work, and
No.
he's come up with 7 basic story types. The first one of those is overcoming the monster. It doesn't have to be an actual monster; it can be any villain. Which in some ways is a very basic type of story, although it's got its own inner complexity. But one of the key things about it is the hero of the overcoming a monster story is never adequate to the task to begin with.
Yeah.
They have to. I mean, usually they're successful at the very end. But they're inadequate to the task of overcoming the monster, probably for most of the story and most of the novel. So in that sense, Steve's situation, he clearly is the hero because he's the least well-equipped person.
Exactly.
But presumably by the end, he deals with whatever the problem is at that stage.
His circumstances actually end up molding him there. He's quite content to be a normal rancher, and then certain things happen that force him into the role of bounty hunter. Another classic example, I don't know, you guys are familiar with The Matrix, Keanu Reeves?
Yes.
The first one. So I think his name, Lawrence Fishburne, was Morpheus, and he said that he believes Keanu Reeves is the one. And then it's proven that Keanu Reeves isn't the one until he starts to believe that he is. And that's when you see him grab hold of the strap and swing the helicopter across, and then he actually becomes the one. So it's a progression. I mean, that's a futuristic movie, but it's going straight back to your tradition there. It's an oral tradition. Build up the hero, they're inadequate, and then they have to acquire the skills and actually start to believe in themselves.
I mean,
I enjoy that.
What makes overcoming the monster interesting is that the monster or the villain also evolves at the same time as alongside of the hero, so that the challenge changes as the story progresses. And according to Booker, the archetypal transition for the villain is predator, holdfast, and avenger. So the predator is when they come and steal all the cattle.
Yeah.
So that action of stealing the cattle and injuring Julio uh, is a typical predator type of activity. Now they're pursuing him, and presumably, uh, when they catch up with him, he's in some sort of hideout or of some description, maybe his
Yeah.
house, maybe a cave on the way or whatever, and and that can be a place for treasure. It can be a place where people are held captive. It can simply just be a place where they can easily defend it. There's all sorts of, uh, and usually what then happens is that the hero manages to get into the hideout and the holdfast and causes some damage, and then the villain wants to get revenge for that.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's exactly what's happened here. So um, they've done something which they perceive as normal, and then the person's retaliated and defended themselves, and all of a sudden that makes the good guy the bad guy in their eyes. They take it personally. They're out for revenge now, and that just basically that's led on to the flow of the rest of the series. I've planned a seven book series for this. Obviously, there's scope for a lot more books there, but for now it's just seven books, and I'm trying to get out a book a month. That's the aim. It's more like having a TV series. They're not too long. They're about 35,000 words. That's just what we found the audience or the readers want. So that's the aim at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I just described sort of an archetypal story, but immediately you could see
you can fit it. There's always that general structure. I always, when I write a story out, I always put down the summary per chapter, basic outline of what I want to happen here, 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 and here. And it's 50, 60, maybe 70% right if you're lucky, and you end up making little changes. But I always call it putting down the tree trunk, because tree trunk is a tree trunk is a tree trunk. You've got that general upright frame. And then what makes trees unique, or what makes stories unique, is when you start adding the branches to them, and different leaves. That's your dialogue and setting up why this person is here, what they said, what they saw, your imagery, all that sort of thing. A classic example, I spoke to a group of school children, and I said to them, we're going from your school here, we're going to go to town, and when we're there, there's a bank robber, and we end up stopping the bank robber. Now, that's your basic tree trunk of the story. It's that we went to town and we stopped a bank robber. Now, the branches are the details. So why did we go to town? How did we get to town? Did we go along the toll road? Did we go along the road by the beach? Did we drive in a car? Did we walk? Did we fly there? All those things. And then what was our reason for going to town? Were we going to the bank? Were we going to do shopping? Were we going to visit a friend? It's all those little details. So like you said, you've got those main structures that are always there, your foundation, your building blocks. And then you're just adding your own spin, as Jemma said earlier. You're adding your own perspective onto it and your own reason for the characters doing what they're doing and saying what they're saying. That's the fun part.
Yeah, and it's that underlying structure that makes it a satisfying story, and attempts to undermine the structure often don't really work for that reason. But
exactly.
Jemma, I was just going to ask Jemma, how did you find Chris's story?
Well, it's not a genre that I'm very used to at all. But I was just kind of listening. It was kind of like you brought the listener into that moment, so it was very quite detailed in terms of descriptive nature, which is always good in stories, because if you can take the listener or the reader into that moment with those characters, then that means that there's more, it's more relatable and real, because you're actually seeing, what's going on, hearing what's going on, and you're kind of in
the moment.
scene.
Yeah. I want to do a little quick test quickly. So, ladies first, Jemma, what in your mind? What does Steve Savage look like? Just based on that little bit that I read there.
Did you say he had blonde hair?
No,
Was that the
no, he
character, or
didn't
was
have
that
blonde
the
hair.
other
His
character?
brother did. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So,
Oh,
but that just highlights a key point as well. Chris, your take of Steve Savage. What did he look like in your mind?
I'm seeing him as quite young, probably a teenager in
Okay.
years. Uh, quite quite slim build, not a lot of muscle or fat. As a farm worker, so I suppose yes, he would have some muscle, but uh, I don't see him as being a big,
Big hefty guy.
burly guy who's going to just punch the lights out of the villain and then go home.
Yeah.
uh,
So
and,
yeah,
and and possibly someone who's actually not convinced that he's able to do that much. Certainly not on his own. He brings his cousins or whatever with him.
exactly. So it's quite interesting that both of you have that different perspective there on what he looks like, and it's your imagination bringing the character to life. I've given you that he's a guy and his name's Steve Savage. I do detail him a bit more, and he is a bit of a fighter. He's actually quite stocky. He's married with a kid. That detail comes out later.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've found in certain books is that they force you to imagine the character and the setting in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
So they all come in. Jem is wearing her jersey. It's got a pink collar. It's white with blue and pink stripes. Now, if I just say to you, Gemma was sitting in her room or at a cafe or walking through the streets of London and she was wearing a jersey, you can immediately picture the buildings in your head and you can picture her wearing a jersey. You don't need to know exactly what color it is and that a raindrop dripped off that lamppost at precisely 3:15 in the afternoon or whatever. You don't need that much detail. And I find some writers try and cram too much imagery. It actually takes away from the story. You want to know that, for example, Chris and Jemma are all sitting here in a podcast together and they're discussing books, they're discussing writing, they're talking about traditions of storytelling and song, etc. We don't need to know exactly what the background looks like in each of the places we're at, or what we had for breakfast, or what we're wearing, etc. A lot of that is you have to have it in a movie because you're seeing it visually, but in a book or a poem or even a song, you're letting the person actually imagine things for themselves based on their own experiences. So I think it's that's a big lesson I've learned in my writing is don't cram detail down the reader's throat. They don't like it. They don't want it. You read a book because you want to be in an imaginary world. You want to use your imagination and actually enjoy the story, not the detail in the story.
that's an interesting point. Can I just? I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but because I've learned from a songwriting book to kind of, I don't, this might just be a practice thing, but I do like a daily sort of, well, I say daily, but I do a practice where when I'm writing, I will look at everything that's around me and write down exactly, what is there. And then I tend to also do that within stories as well, and the reason is because if you can take someone into their senses, then they feel as if they're there. I do agree with you in that you don't want too much detail because you want them to use their imagination. But I do think there is a benefit to, because like I'm even thinking of someone who does a lot of that is J.K. Rowling. She always sets up the scene like in massive detail at the beginning of her books, and I do think sometimes it can be people do get a bit like annoyed because it's like how much detail are we going to have until the story begins kind of thing, but I do think that it also gives like a realism to it.
No,
Do
I,
you?
I, I agree
Yeah,
100% there. I think I need to clarify a bit. So
yeah,
J.K. Rowling sets up scenes amazingly, but they're relevant to what she's telling you about. So
yeah,
she's describing things to you. She's not going too much in detail. She'll say the expansive hall, or the towering ceiling, the bright lights, this, that, and the other. She won't say, okay, in this room there were 10 boys sitting at a table. There were 10
Yeah.
chairs. The chair looked exactly like this. The leg was brown.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
teacup
yeah,
was
yeah,
pink.
yeah, yeah.
It's that there's got to be a fine line. You do want to give enough detail to create that element. So, for example, when I'm writing a scene in a town, I'll either say that the cowboy sloshed through the mud as the rain beat down on his slicker, which is their
Yeah.
raincoat. So you know immediately in your mind, oh, this poor guy, he's going through ankle deep mud, must be terrible. It's just a huge mud pit there. Or I'll say the sweat rolled down his forehead as the sun beat mercilessly down upon him, and he looked around for shade. So it's small details like that. You definitely do need to give some detail and some description. That's been my biggest research, is types of trees and animals, flowers, that sort of thing in the areas I write about. Obviously, I haven't toured around the Wild West, so it's you've got to actually do a bit of research. But I agree 100% with what you said. You do need to help if I can summarize it, you need to help the reader imagine. You don't need to imagine for the reader.
Yeah.
That's the difference. That's the difference between books and movies. In a movie, you're actually showing them what you've imagined as the director. In a book, you're telling them about it and letting them imagine the scene.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting going from one to the other, either way.
Yeah.
That you've got to change the way that you do it. And certainly, I mean, my experience is mostly with written and spoken stories. And you can put a lot more detail in written stories than in a spoken story. Because if people get lost in the detail, they can always backtrack in a written story.
Exactly.
But they can't backtrack when there's somebody stood in front of them speaking. And that's one of the challenges of spoken storytelling.
I think it's a really good point. Spoken storytelling also relates to teaching. I don't know if either of you have ever had a teacher or lecturer at university who's gone so in depth that you've forgotten the point of what they were talking about at the overall. So, an example, I did accounting when I was at varsity, and for me, when you get given an example, it allows you to see what they were talking about. Whereas if somebody comes along and spouts random figures or rules of accounting at you, there's certain people who enjoy that. I'm not one of those. I actually need to see what you're talking about and get the practical example. As I said earlier, there are 100 different ways of learning, so you could theoretically say there are 100 different ways of writing.
Oh yes, and but there's also that flowing from one form of delivery to another. This is why share is so important in Fine Tales Share, because the way that you share the story actually impacts on the way that you tell it.
Exactly, and the people and your audience determines how you share that story. Mm-hmm. Because if it's not something they can relate to, then they're not going to retain the memory, I guess. Or I guess that's how the tradition of oral storytelling and sharing of traditions began, from way back when, thousands of years ago. Mm-hmm. If the person didn't remember your story exactly, they're not going to tell it to the next generation in the same way.
And I'm sure that stories did evolve, and sometimes you find stories and you can see that they're related, but they've moved apart geographically and through time.
There's been a bit of a divergence here and there, and somebody's spin on it, or just they forgot one bit, so made up their own bit.
That's right. Anyway, I think we better move on, Jemma, and was actually the contribution I was going to make. When Jemma and I discussed this, we thought we'd talk about how we use fiction. I do use it a bit in quite a lot in my coaching, where I'm coaching people about the stories that they tell from their own lives. But I do also occasionally tell fictional stories. I don't write them, so they're ephemeral in that sense. We have in Sheffield a a little organisation called Story Forge that used to meet in the upstairs room of a pub called the Fat Cat, which you will not have heard of, Chris, but arguably the best pub in Sheffield. And but because of the lockdown, they weren't meeting, and then they've started to meet. And the main place they've been meeting since they've restarted is the General Cemetery on Cemetery Road. And I joined them for the first time last week, and we sat in the pitch darkness eating jacket potatoes and telling stories with owls hooting and both real and fictional rats running around and all sorts of things.
I prefer the fictional.
Yes, don't we all? But yeah, but it's there's and telling a story where you can just see the outlines of figures and you can't see the faces is quite a strange experience. What I thought I would do is just give you a flavour. The stories that I use for fiction are connected, and I tell different, sort of episodically, but not in any particular order. And the two main protagonists is a young teenager called Daniel and his cat, or you could say the two of the protagonists are a cat and his servant Daniel, depending on how you look at it. And I'm not going to tell the whole of this story because it would be too long, but I just want to do a little section of it, and I've chosen this section for a number of reasons which might bring it up. But basically, the things that you need to happen at the beginning of the story is that folk live perpendicular to our lives. They are, you might call it, in other traditions, you might call it fairies or ghosts or spirits or whatever, and their motivations are mysterious because we can't quite see them, and they're mostly invisible. Very young children can see them, and apparently cats can see them. And Daniel is extraordinary in that he can see and hear them, which makes his life an absolute misery, as you might imagine. And the only person he knows who has a similar curse or blessing, depending on how you look at it, is his grandmother, who died young, and that's pretty much all he knows about her. And the only person he has to talk to is Cat, who is probably one of the folk, although Cat has his own strange behaviour that's also a mystery. But anyway, in this story, the two of them have a blazing row because Cat is overweight and can't accept it. And so Cat storms out and decides to go it alone. And Daniel follows him the next morning and finds all his drinking mates who've been beaten up by Cat, and he's drunk all the mead and eaten all the nibbles. And they're expecting Daniel to do something about it. But this is the bit where we join the story. Cat was feeling peckish, and he searched around, and then he saw his opportunity. He took on his human form. David and Peter were sat on a bench at the railway station. David got a text from Daniel. He wasn't able to join them after all. His cat had gone missing, and he was out searching for it. Oh, said David, Daniel and his cat. Who's ever known somebody who always takes his cat everywhere with him? It's ridiculous. But Peter wasn't listening. Peter was admiring a beautiful young woman who'd sat down on the bench next to him. Hello, said Peter. Hello, said the young woman. You're waiting for a train, said Peter. Yes, she said. That's why I'm at a station. Ah, said Peter. I'm Peter. Oh, she said. Hello, Peter. David looked on aghast. Said, "Hang on a minute." He said, "You're very familiar. You remind me of someone. Do you know someone called Daniel Robertson?" And the girl turned and said, "Yes, I'm his cousin. His grand cousin? Yeah, I'm the best of all his cousins," she said. "Ah," said David. "This is David," said Peter. And "What's your name?" "Oh, I'm Katja," she said. "Ah," said Peter. "There's a very good cafe at the top of the steps. Would you like to come and have a drink with us and maybe a piece of cake?" "Oh, yes," said Katja, "I'd love to." So they started to climb the steps. As they climbed the steps, David said to Katja, "Why are you wearing a school uniform on a Saturday?" And she said, "Well, it's cool." "It looks very old-fashioned," he said. "Yes," she said, "that's why it's cool." They went into the cafe and the two boys sat down and asked her what she would like to eat, and the waiter stood there and she got the menu and started to read. "Yes, I'll have the all-day breakfast. I'll have the steak, pie and chips. I'll have the steak and kidney pudding and chips, the shepherd's pie and chips." And the waiter said, hang on, I can't write fast enough." "Oh," she said, "I'll just have everything on the menu with chips." David said, "You couldn't possibly eat all of that. No one could eat all of that." "Do you want to bet?" said Katja. "I bet you I can eat every morsel of this, and if I do, you are paying." "Oh, yes," said Peter. David, "Ah!" And so the food began to arrive, plate after plate. I don't know if you've ever watched a beautiful young woman, or indeed a beautiful young man, eating, and there's something very compelling about it. And Peter was drawn in and couldn't take his eyes off Katja. David, on the other hand, couldn't take his eyes off the plates and was amazed at the way in which Katja systematically ate everything, food into mouth, and on and on. And whenever David reached out to pinch a chip, she'd bash him with the fork and carry on eating. And gradually a pile of dirty plates climbed up, and after she'd gone through all the savouries, she went on to the famous fruit cake the size of a house brick, the vanilla slice the size of a house brick, the treacle tart. She worked her way through the whole menu, and by the time she finished, everybody in the cafe was stood around watching her, all holding their breath. And she finished and said, "Thank you, boys, that was delicious." She gave a delicate little belch and walked out of the cafe. And then everyone came to their senses, and pandemonium ensued as the boys realised that they were having to pay all that money for all that food, and the beautiful young woman had walked out on them. When they eventually managed to get away, they didn't hear the laughter or see the cat on the roof watching them from above. Now, that's an excerpt, as I say, from a longer story.
That's an awesome story. I like it.
Now,
I like how Chris uses his hand movements as well, but you can't see that on the podcast.
yeah, sorry about that.
It's emphasis. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Have you shared one of those stories before?
Yes,
but
you've heard.
story?
I think you've heard one of the earliest stories.
Yeah.
Now, well, I'll just say a couple of things about it, and do interrupt me if anything occurs to you. I mean, first of all, what I'm doing is what a lot of performance storytellers do: is that I'm telling somebody else's story. And the source for this is an anime called Natsume Sujinro. Natsume is Daniel, and it's based in Japan, as you might expect. The folk are, I can't remember what they call them now, but anyway, the sort of spirits in Japan. but I've moved it to South Yorkshire, and it's possible Jemma and certainly some of our listeners might even know which railway station I was talking about, because there's only one in the whole world where you have to go up some steps to get to the cafe. Yeah. uh, and but it's a sort of mysterious world. It's our world, but it's not quite clear how everything sort of connects, because it's really just a fantasy. So that's the first thing. But the reason why I chose that particular excerpt as well is that I wanted just to show. Well, one of the things about these stories is they are folklore elements, but in a very realistic, or not a very realistic, but quite a realistic modern setting. So they've all got mobile phones, they go to school, and there's just ordinary things going on, but all these weird other things going on under the surface. And here we've got Kat, who is very much in the tradition of the trickster, neither a villain nor a hero, and Daniel's very clearly the hero in these stories. And Kat is his sort of sidekick who helps him, except when he hinders him. And that's all part of what's going on. But Kat is a better person for being with Daniel, and Daniel is more effective for being with Kat. That's the sort of relationship. I also there's also in this particular version of the story, the siren, the seductive woman, and also the use of a sense that not just the two boys but everybody in the cafe are being sort of charmed
spellbound,
into spellbound, and these are Kat's powers, and so I wanted all of that in the story, but a lot of it is the impact on relationships, and I mean clearly Daniel's going to have some explaining to do when David and Peter confront him with this cousin that he didn't even know he had. But I don't know whether one of the challenges though is, and this is the thing about the visual. You were talking about earlier, Chris, about films. The visual as opposed to the written or spoken word. When you see this in the anime, the anime does flash back to the grandmother, so you know that Kat's human form is the same as the grandmother's. But how I convey that without actually saying it, I'm not sure whether I've succeeded or not. Did you pick up
that? I thought that was really well done. Yeah, I think it's another thing is, I'm sure Jemma and I would have had different pictures of Kat in our minds, of what she looked like as a cat and in human form. But again, I like that. I don't like to be told what I must be imagining. You gave us the outline there that there is a cat, there's Rail. I could picture everything in my mind just by the few words that you had there. You're going upstairs into the restaurant. They're all this big crowd gathered around, and they're all amazed at how much she's eating. And then when she disappears, it's as if they wake up, they come out of this trance.
But it's also real. It's happened. Yes, and this, what's the relationship between Kat and the grandmother? That's one of the ongoing mysteries, and I don't know the answer to that, so don't ask me. But there's something other. It's a funny scene, but there's also something a bit sinister about it as well, and I quite like that mix.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'd actually like to see sometime. You've got me curious now. I think that's the whole point of a good story. You've told me a bit about it, and now I actually want to know, okay, as I said earlier, what happens next? What happens next?
Yes.
What's the backstory of the character?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Well, it doesn't. The story doesn't go in the direction you might think it might, but but it's about. I mean, obviously there's a reconciliation, but but one of the reasons I chose it is that it's an exploration of the character called Kat, who tends to Daniel tends to be the main character in most of the stories. So it's just getting some a little bit more about him. Anyway, Jemma, I
Yeah.
think if you've nothing more to say about that, we can move on to your topic.
Yep. So yeah, how do I use fiction in my work? Well, I suppose I use fiction a lot actually in acting when I'm playing characters. So that would be a way that I use fiction, would be to act out a character if I'm doing a film or something like that. I've not done many films recently, but in the past I did. Would it be a murder mystery one at one point actually, where I played the lead, and she had to guess. Is it? I'm trying to think. Is yeah? It would be a murder mystery because she was trying to guess. So basically, she was trying to guess who had done it. At her part, it was like a 1920s party, and somebody had killed her mother-in-law, and she had to go through. So basically they did it like they went through the party and she was going through all the guests, and then they did a rewind, and then it went through her mind as if she was re-looking at what she'd already seen, and then sort of speaking it out in her mind of like, this person had their hand here, and what was going, on with their bag, and things like that, to try and work out who had killed her mother-in-law. So you can actually watch that film. It is online. So I'll give Chris the it's called Redgrave, but I'll give Chris the link. So that's one way I use fiction, is if I'm acting in something, a play or a film. And occasionally I will write a fiction song as well, which is what I'm going to talk about. I think I wrote, when I did the one of the other podcasts, I think it was episode 4 with Madeline. I think that was a fiction type of song, perhaps based on my own feelings, but it wasn't about me in as per se. It was just a woman with a box, and then she opens it and it flies out the window, and it's kind of a representation. But with the songs, it's always kind of a very short, it's not really a story as such, in terms of lots of characters and plot lines, and because you only have like 3 minutes or 2 minutes to kind of say the story. So generally, if I have a song that's a story, it will consist of a journey of a character. So normally just one character. It could be two, or possibly three. But the one that I thought of was really quite random, that it came to my mind. But I'd I'd met someone, and for some reason they sparked this idea in me, although the character is not them. But it gave me this idea for this character that lives in on top of a hill and looks out to this field which is called Rover Field, and he's living on his own in this house, and it's called a lonely house, and yet he still has the memory of his wife that used to live there. So this is a little bit of the song, if I can remember it, because I haven't played it in a long time. So it's not one that I've kind of sang before online or anything. It's just one that I wrote many years back. house on the mountain hill, cracks in the window, flowers on the sill. As he looks out to rove a field, he smiles and he gazes at the wheel. No one knows what the people say, but he knows it's not theirs to play. As the wind blows through the trees, I can feel a summer breeze, and it takes me back to you and the things that we've been through. All it takes is to believe, and the love you gave will never leave. And it takes me back to you and the things that we've been through. Not such a lonely house. As he looks at the clock and finds the tick of its rhythm makes him blind, and he knows what he's left behind, like the ride of the forest, ride of the night. No one knows what the people say, but he knows it's not theirs to play. As the wind blows through the trees, I can feel a summer breeze, and it takes me back to you and the things that we've been through. All it takes is to believe, and the love you gave will never leave. And it takes me back to you and the things that we've been through. Not such a lonely house. I can still feel you. Your laugh, your smile, your voice. I can try to forget you, but I don't have a choice. As the wind blows through the trees, I can feel a summer breeze, and it takes me back to you and the things that we've been through. All it takes is to believe, and the love you gave will never leave. And it takes me back to you and the things that we've been through. Not such a lonely house. That's the song.
That was amazing.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
a song. Really, really, really loved that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with no rehearsal.
No
Not-
well, like a minute when I just sort of tried to do it and then
Yeah.
redid it again.
Well, you found the chords.
I found the chords eventually. Yeah, it was. It's interesting because it switches between, because in a song you don't have to say like, and he said this and she said this. It kind of switches between the narrative and then he's speaking from his perspective. So I don't know if that's clear or not.
Oh yeah,
It was clear.
yes, yeah.
And what I really like is just with the words used and the tone, and also what's nice about a song is you're getting to use tone of voice.
Yeah.
So I actually felt like so sorry for the guy, and he's gone through this loss, and it's your heart breaks for the guy actually. And then by
Yeah.
the end of the song, I was feeling more positive because he's more positive, he's uplifted, he actually feels like he's got a purpose again. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's what you're trying to get, but that's what I got from the song.
Yeah,
amazing.
that's what I wanted to achieve with the song, is this kind of sense of that he's not lonely. He feels lonely at times, but then as the wind blows through, it's using that nature kind of thing. It's like the wind's actually blowing through the trees quite a lot right now, but it's like almost that he feels his wife and the love of his life through nature, which then
Her
allows
spirit's
him.
still around.
Yes, yeah. So that allows him to kind of be okay again. But yeah, it was weird because I didn't, at that time I wasn't really writing fictional stories in a song. It was more I wrote from my own experience. But then that kind of just came out of nowhere. So it was interesting. Yeah.
You never know where the inspiration's going to strike from.
No. Well, I kind of, yeah, like I said before, like I know when it happened and why it happened in the terms of who I met at the time, who was an interesting person and told me a lot of stories themselves. But, you know, it wasn't actually related to that person. It just might have been that maybe I got an inspiration just coming through because, like, for example, sometimes on the podcast, and I've wrote songs specifically for the podcast, and it might not be actually inspired by that person themselves or even what they're talking about, but there's just something in the energy that brings about a song in a certain way or a story or something.
Yeah, it's compelling for me because that man could be my father.
Yeah.
My mother died in 1988. He died in 2003. So 15 years. And the house that lived in together since the 60s became a sort of shrine to her.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever we visited, everything about the house was her. And yeah, and it's that spirit sort of living on. I mean, sometimes when people talk about love between two people, they talk about the lover, the beloved, and the love between, as if the love between is a third party in that, and so when one of them dies, the other two carry on together.
Yeah.
It's a really nice way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, I think we've got to pretty much the end of the podcast now. But thank you, Chris and Chris, for sharing your stories and listening to my song. And yeah, does anyone else have anything to say to kind of wrap it up today?
I think we've already said that all the references to what we've been talking about will be in the show
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's
I
anything
think
else.
maybe just to sort of quickly just say, I mean, will be in the show notes, but if you want to find out more about you, Chris, well, both Chris's, but we'll start with Chris, the guest. How does anyone who's listened today and enjoyed what they heard, how do they find out more?
Good question. I've actually got a Facebook page, which is Chris Smith Author, and then I've got my books on Amazon. You just look up Blood on the Range, Caught in the Crossfire, or Steve Savage Bounty Hunter. I'll also send the notes through to Chris to put up on the show notes. And then I've also got a LinkedIn page, Chris Smith Author. So anybody is more than welcome to get hold of me to chat. Really enjoy engaging with people. And it's nice to just get out, network, and hear what people think.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris?
Yes. Well, it'll all be there. I'll put the the Natsumi Sujinro. I'll put that in and see if I can work out how to point you in where to find it. Yeah. So
Chris does telling stories, making business as well, and you can have one-on-one sessions with Chris as well, which I really recommend on storytelling. And with me, you can also do one-on-one sessions on finding your voice, and I also do group workshops, as well as a lot of my songs are on YouTube, Jemma Rosenthal, and I have a Facebook page, LinkedIn, various different, other platforms, which will be in the show notes. But yes, that is, I think, everything.
okay.
And yeah.
No.
Oh, you can also find me on creativehearts.coach.
Just wanted to say
Facebook.
thanks so much for having me on the show, guys. Really enjoyed this evening. It's been amazing listening to you guys, chatting to you, and like I said, that song was fantastic, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes, it's well, we've got a good recording of it now, so we'll see what we can do. Okay, right. Well, thank you and farewell.